Guys, this is Vishal Dandote, and in this video, we will see what is the binding in Angular and what are the ways to bind our data with the Angular component. So let's start. So if you need any notes or tutorial related to Angular or Angular binding, so I have written my blog on pressurecutter.com. So this is my site, and here you can find all the tutorials related to all the programming languages as well as the Angular. So as we are discussing about the Angular binding, so I have written this blog here. So let's start with the Angular binding. So what is in the Angular binding? So whenever we need to bind our component state or the component data with the um, Angular HTML, uh, the component HTML template called as binding. So there are three ways to bind our data with the Angular component. Before we see those syntax or see those way, I would like to share uh, I would like to show one diagram with you. So here you can see there are three ways. So basically in this diagram you can see this template file, which is the HTML file, and this is the TypeScript file. So basically whenever we are trying, or whenever we are binding our data, so data goes to maybe TypeScript to HTML or HTML to TypeScript. So two-way binding means data will go TypeScript to HTML, and at the same time data will come from HTML to TypeScript. This is called two-way binding. So basically there are three ways. First one, two-way binding. Another one, like whenever we need to bind some data from view to model. So view to model means whenever you click any button, whenever you enter any value on the UI. So basically, let's say from your browser, a- any action you have done, or many sorry any button or anything you click on the UI, and at the same time you need to get that data in the TypeScript file, that is called view to model. And whenever you need to bind some data from TypeScript file to HTML, that's called model to view. So model to view, maybe that is data coming from that data is coming from maybe API calling, or from the backend side, or maybe that you have written as a JSON format or any variable in the TypeScript, and that you need to bind with the HTML templates. So that is called model to view binding. So let's start with the one-way data binding. So one-way data binding means one way has two part. As we discuss, data maybe bind with the HTML to TypeScript, uh, or HTML to component, or component to view. View means HTML file. So let's see another diagram for the better understanding. So as you can see here, so this is the one-way data binding, and it has two data flows. So one, model to view, and another one, view to models. So model to view, basically we are binding the variables, so which is maybe data coming from the backend, and that is we are storing into the array or JSON, array of JSON, and that we are binding with the our HTML templates. So in that case we can use two syntax. One is called curly bracket and your variable name, and another is called property name and your data. So whenever you need to bind any data to the attributes, let's say you have image and you need to bind the src, the source which is coming from the backend side, that time you can use the property binding. So basically keep in mind, whenever you need to bind any data with the attribute, you will use property binding. And whenever you need to bind some data in the HTML tags, maybe in the p tag, you need to bind your name. In that case you will use the curly bracket. So like in this way you can bind the data. We are going to discuss this with the practical example, but for now keep in mind that model to view we can bind the variables, and there are two syntax called as, one is called curly bracket and another is called property name syntax or property binding syntax. Another data flow is called view to model, and in this data flow or in this binding we can bind our events, or we can get the data from view to model or your browser to the TypeScript using the events. So whenever we need to bind the events, you need to write the parentheses in the HTML code, and after that you need to write the event name here, as you can clearly see the diagram over here, and then after that your method name. So let's see the practical diagram. I hope you understand, you have properly understand the data binding flow and what are the ways, or what is the way to bind the data with our maybe HTML to view or view to HTML or the two-way binding. So whenever we are talking about the two-way binding, then it has another syntax. So basically the syntax is nothing but we can bind our data with the ng module, and in this way you can write the syntax. So here you can write your variable name, and after that this syntax. So basically what this will do, it will get the input value, and at the same time it will bind to your TypeScript variable, and again you can show that on UI. So basically in this way you can use the two-way binding. So let's see the practical example now. As we have created our project in the previous lecture, so I'm going to use same project and the same components. So let me open my component.ts file. So here what I need to do, I will create another variable called my full name, and here I will write Vishal Namdev and Dandavate. And here, after that, in this way, we are going to bind our data model to view or model to template. So keep in mind, model means TypeScript file and view means HTML file. So whenever we need to bind our TypeScript variables with the HTML code, that time we need to use curly bracket or double curly bracket or the property binding syntax. So here I'm going to use the curly bracket for this variable. So in this h1 I need to bind my name. So how can I do that? Using the curly bracket. So here you can simply bind your variable. If you save this code and if you go to your browser, and yeah, you can see here I have successfully bind my name. So in this way you can bind your model data with the view or with the HTML using the curly bracket. So let's see another one example for the binding. So here for now let's say what we can do. So let's say image source, and here we can simply, let me get any image source from the browser. So Angular image, and okay, copy image source, copy image address. Okay, and here I will paste that address, and what I need to do now, I need to bind my this image source with my image tag, and in the image tag I will bind this image source variable to my image tag src attribute using the property binding. So how can we do that? We can do that using the property binding. So here image, and as you can see here I have my source attribute, and we can bind that using the square bracket. So opening and closing square bracket, and simply you can put your variable name like this. If you save this file, go to your browser, and here you can see I have successfully bind my image with the html templates. In this way you can use the uh, property binding syntax. You can also use the double curly bracket syntax in this way as well. So yeah, in this way you can also bind the same data with the attribute as well. So keep in mind, whenever we need to bind data from uh, model or the TypeScript file to HTML file, then we need to use the curly bracket or property syntax. So after that, we have another one way binding type called as view to model. So view to model means we need to always write some events or collect some data from the UI. So in this case, how we can collect the data from UI? So let's collect some data from UI with the view to model binding using the events. So let me write my input tag here, and here we can simply say um, input. Here we can write our method name. So what we need to do, we need to create one method here like get input data, and in this case we need to write event. Here we can simply say console.log and event.target.value. Okay, so how can I do that? So here we can simply bind my method name, and here I will simply pass dollar event to the to my file. So okay, we are getting the error. Why we are getting the error? Because in this file we need to pass any. Yes, now error is gone, and we can simply get the data from UI to model. So let's see if it is running. Okay, I think let me write this code above the image for the better visibility. And here, okay, it is coming, but where it is going, I think there is any error. Let me check. There is no error. Okay, and down. Let me check. Let me use another one event maybe. So there is no issue with the event. So what is happening here? Let me remove this and let me check now. Okay. Oh, sorry. It's coming after the image. Okay, okay, got it. So basically these are the inline elements, and because of that it is going to next line. So here we can simply say div and Yeah, now you can see this is on the top side. So let me let me change the event as input, or we can use any event key down. So whenever we enter anything in the input box, and you can see we are getting data in the model as we write the console.log function in the model. So in this way you can bind any type of event in the um, in the angular binding with the view to model binding. So after that another one binding is remaining, and in that case we can get the data from UI and bind that with the angular variables, angular variables, maybe TypeScript variables, and again we can bind that data with the UI. So like there is two-way data flow direction, UI to model and model to UI. So let's see how can we do that. So let me write another input for collecting the data. And here we can simply say ng model, and here we need to use variable name. So here we can simply say data input data equal to empty string. Here we can simply say input data, and after that we need to print that input data. So here you can see input data. Let me run this code, and ng model. Okay, this should work. Take the syntax. Okay, ng model, and oh sorry, this is giving us error because of this bracket, and I have removed that bracket. And if we try to execute it again, so what's it is saying? Okay, input data slash. Okay, so basically this is saying that we are attribute is not valid. That attribute element in the model is not valid attribute. Oh, sorry. Yeah. So basically, we need whenever we are using. Keep in mind. So whenever we are using ng model with the Angular binding, make sure we have um, forms module import in our app.module.ts file, or injected that module as a dependency in the app.module.ts file. As I mentioned in this blog, you can see I have clearly mentioned that if you are using the ng module, make sure you have added forms module in your root module. So for this, we can go to app.module.ts and simply import that module, import, and from @angular slash forms, and here simply say forms module, and we can add that module in this imports array. So basically forms module, we can refresh the page, and you can see our code is successfully are run by the browser. So here we can print anything. So, and you can see our data is successfully binding view to model and again model to view. So in this way, we have three types of binding in the Angular, and I hope you understand that. And whenever you need any notes or more detail about it, you can go to my pressurecutter.com website, and you can see there is a blog called binding in Angular. You can read that and get clear your concept. Thank you so much, guys. See you in next video.